Okay, I think we've reached a critical mass of attendees, so why don't we get started? Welcome again to IJC's webinar on careers in immigration. We are very excited for this program. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to what is going to be a very interesting conversation about career opportunities in the immigration law space. Just some quick housekeeping before we get started. This event will be recorded, so for those who aren't able to attend today, you can watch it later on IJC's website and on our social channels. If you do have questions at any time during the event, please submit them through the Q&A box. This event will run until 1:30 Eastern Time. We'll have about 45 minutes of a panel discussion between our moderator and our speakers, which include IJC Fellows, alumni, and a board member. You'll get to know them all very well shortly. And then we'll save some time at the end to answer questions from the audience. As a reminder, this webinar is part of a series that IJC is doing spotlighting the achievements of our alumni, many of whom occupy positions of leadership across the immigration space. And if you'd like to check out the previous webinar we did in February on that topic, I will leave a link in the chat after this program. But I know all of you are here to hear from our current speakers and here for this webinar. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Jojo Annobil, IJC's Executive Director and the moderator of this panel. So thank you and welcome again, and take it away, Jojo.
Chris, thank you so much for helping to organize this webinar. Hello, everyone. And again, so sorry for the late start. So I'll just jump into it. But first, I just wanted to welcome all of you to this panel discussion on careers in immigration law. In a few minutes, you will hear from our esteemed panelists, IJC alumni, a current fellow, and a board member who is a retired immigration judge. We are talking about this subject because we hear so much about how do I kickstart my career in immigration? And if I do, what are the different trajectory or steps and pathways that I can continue to work in this field? Today, you are fortunate enough to be able to hear from some of our alums and also a fellow who are on the front lines and can tell you about some of the areas they are working in and how they've moved from fellowship into some of these positions. So in the interest of time, you will notice that all of their bios in the chat, you can access it. So I will start and throw my first question to Karla Ostolaza, who is the managing director at Bronx Defenders. So Karla, first of all, thank you so much for making the time to be part of this. I'm interested, and I think everyone would want to know, what has happened to you since you left the fellowship as a fellow, and what has been the trajectory of your career up to now, where you are now a managing attorney?
Thank you so much, Jojo. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. I was in the inaugural class of IJC Fellows in 2014. I was a fellow at Bronx Defenders. Since then, I work as a fellow staff attorney doing direct representation in a variety of cases, including removal defense, detained, non-detained removal defense, padilla advice, affirmative work, working with adults, children. I was very interested in getting as much of an understanding of different types of cases and situations. So I had a very broad type of cases that I worked on for 4 years. And then after that, in 2018, I decided to become a supervisor in the New York Immigrant Family Unity Project, NIFUP, which is our public defender system for people detained and in removal proceedings in New York. And what led me to apply for this position and made me really excited about it is that I really like problem solving, big picture problem solving. And that was a great opportunity for me to look at what was happening in a lot of different cases, supporting a lot of different attorneys and see the patterns and how I can strategize with them and be a sounding board to develop strategy and support the people they were representing and themselves. Then I realized that I also really like that big picture thinking when it came to program management, to how do you make the life of staff better, more efficient? How do they better serve our clients? And that, like, how to create guidelines, for example, for representation, for high quality representation that doesn't run people through the ground and completely burn them out, like how to achieve that balance. All of that was very interesting to me. So I decided to move on to a more of a program management position. So I became the deputy director of the immigration practice at Bronx Defenders. And then I moved on to be managing director. And in this position, I've been very fortunate to supervise supervisors and gain even more perspective on like what's happening, what are the needs of staff, what are the needs of our clients, what are the changes in patterns in the surveillance and detention of our clients, for example. And that also allows me to do policy work more effectively based on like that consistent feedback, and also continue the work of every day trying to make our staff's life better. And that benefits our staff and it benefits our clients as well.
Karla, so as a follow-up question, a lot of people shy away from becoming supervisors, or some people are interested and would not want to know what it takes to be a good supervisor. Can you give some advice based on what you know as a supervising attorney and also as a managing director? Absolutely.
I think my first advice would be to not feel like they need to wait until they know everything in immigration law and procedure to feel like you can be a supervisor, because you will never know everything. The law is always changing, policy is always changing, practices are always changing. You need to have a solid understanding, of course, but it's after you gain that solid understanding of the foundational level of immigration law and procedure, you can then connect people to knowledge, to support, and making those connections and how to gain the knowledge that people need to do their cases is much more important. So just like consider that instead of thinking you need like, your whole life of experience to be a supervisor. And I think that goes hand in hand with my second advice, which is you need to be willing to make mistakes and not know everything, and be a collaborator with the people that you're supporting, right? Because it's not about dictating strategy or dictating rules. It's about working together from a different perspective and to serve the people that we're serving.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your work as well. So we'll switch gears a bit. And today there are more than 120 law school immigration law clinics nationwide. And some of our fellows have entered into that realm. And Jessica, I would like to throw this question to you to share what drew you to academia, and if you can share your clinic experience developing invaluable lawyering and substantive knowledge for students in immigration law.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. And I really feel very privileged to be with this group of really wonderful panelists and in this community. So like Karla, I was in the inaugural class of IJC Fellows along with Miriam. And prior to becoming an immigration attorney, I had been a teacher for about 5 years in New York City public schools. I taught 11th and 12th grade history. And I've always been really interested in the process of teaching and learning. I don't think that teachers are the only people that teach in a classroom. I think we learn a lot from the students and the other stakeholders with whom we engage. And I've always also been interested in the democratization of knowledge. And so for me, the clinical space is such a wonderful hybrid of teaching, learning, and engaging in the democratization of information, because we are also engaging with clients, their families, and community members about what are the issues facing directly impacted folks at any given moment in the context of immigration. We are also talking to our students, many of whom are directly impacted as well, and are also engaging intergenerationally among clinical faculty and students. And so it's a really unique, and just, I feel very privileged to be in this space to speak to people across generations, across backgrounds, across class, across race, and talk about how to support immigrant rights and to support folks facing detention and deportation. So that's what drew me to the space. I also was drawn to the space because the clinical model is, and a lot of the clinics have this model. You mentioned there are over 100 across the country. We do direct representation, but we also support campaigns in the fight for immigrant rights. And that is just a beautiful privilege because we get to support organizations and coalitions advancing immigrant rights at the local, state, and national level, and thinking critically about what their vision for immigrant rights should be. So it's not just about what the law is now, but it's about what it should be, and how to advance the rights of all people in the future. And that, again, is just I just feel really lucky to be in this space because it allows us to engage in direct representation, but it allows us to also think about how lawyers can be a support in movements around immigrant rights.
Jessica, we are lucky to have you in this space, so it's mutual. I would love for you to also talk a bit about or give some advice to those young professionals who are interested in pursuing a career in academia similar to you.
Sure. So I think, like Karla, I would say that people can engage with academia at early moments in their career. And so you don't have to wait until you feel like you know everything to engage in academia. And I think one of the best ways to do so is there are a lot of fellowship models in a lot of the clinical programs across the country and here in New York City, and they permit lawyers who are in practice to either be a fellow in a clinical teaching program or adjunct for a semester or for a summer to support a clinical program. And I think that's a really good opportunity because a lot of clinical faculty are really flexible about what adjuncts and fellows can do, whether they want to teach particular courses and kind of flex their muscles to see whether teaching is the right fit and it's something that they enjoy, because not everybody enjoys teaching. It also allows for some experimentation around cases, right? So it might be that in direct representation in a particular organization, you've been doing removal defense at the immigration court level and you're interested in federal court practice. Well, you could say, you know, I'm really interested in learning this and co-counseling with a professor who's done it before and supervising a student team so that I can learn this new area of how to advance immigrant rights or how to defend against deportation in the federal courts, in the district court, or at the Court of Appeals, or even before the Supreme Court. So the clinical model does permit some expanding of one's knowledge because immigrant rights clinics often take on novel cases or cases that you might not have done in your ordinary practice. And the other thing that I would encourage people to do, and this has always been the case since I've been a clinical teaching fellow and in a legal classroom, but I think it's a shift from earlier years, is that I would encourage people who are interested in academia to think about what they would write about and to think about what scholarship that they would be interested in pursuing. It is my understanding that across the board, no matter the law school, it is really encouraged that people write and that people publish scholarship. And honestly, that's been the most challenging thing for me as a lawyer and as a mom. It's been really hard to carve out time to think about also writing. But if you are interested in legal academia, I think it's really, really important to make yourself marketable across the legal academy, is to think about what creative scholarship you could be advancing and what legal research you'd be interested in pursuing when you want to go on the market and when you want to seek those career opportunities.
Thank you, Jessica. And it's a good segue since you're talking about writing. Research, writing go hand in hand. Every year we receive applications from applicants who are coming off federal and state court clerkships. And we've always wondered what it takes to do that and what that impact is on the work we do in direct services. So Lauren, you had the privilege of working in the federal system doing a clerkship before your fellowship started. And if you can share with the audience any impact your 2-year federal clerkship had on your current fellowship working in direct services.
And thank you to IJC and to you, Jojo, for having me today. I'm already learning so much from the panelists, so I really appreciate the opportunity to join. So as Jojo mentioned, I'm a current fellow. I started in the class of 2021. I'm in Connecticut doing removal defense, but prior to that, I clerked for 2 years at the U.S. Court of International Trade. And I didn't really have this planned out specifically before, ending up where I am today, as I've heard from so many other practitioners. But clerking was actually perfect for providing me the base of skills that I needed to be able to start my fellowship, start practicing and having confidence in my writing and my litigation skills, because I was able to kind of nurture that in a really dynamic and safe environment for 2 years. So obviously brief writing and motion writing have been huge parts of my litigation practice as a removal defense attorney. So those are things that I was doing for 2 years under the guidance of a judge. And I put those to use all the time, maybe more than I would like on some days, depending. Well, my clerkship also gave me so many insights into judicial decision-making and the processes and inner workings of courts, and how are the motions decided, what are the things judges are looking for when they're deciding cases or even deciding smaller motions. So those are things that are really helpful to me in being able to educate my clients on what a judge is looking at and what a judge is looking for, and help us decide what strategically will work for them in their removal cases. And it's just been, I've been surprised at all the ways it has been able to help me as I've represented clients. But I've also been able to think back on my clerkship and how I saw different lawyers use different styles in their litigation before the court I clerked for, and kind of pull from what I liked and avoid what I didn't like as I started appearing before the immigration judges in Connecticut. We also sat, the judge I clerked for sat by designation on various courts of appeals, so I got experience with a range of issues, including immigration cases that were up on appeal, but also a lot of administrative law cases that have been very useful in informing how I develop a record or preserve issues for appeal. I'm kind of keeping that in my mind as I am presenting a record. What did I look for as a clerk in the record? What did I need to see to know that an issue was preserved? So that's been another really big advantage, I think, going into the IJC Fellowship, having that experience. That I don't think would have gotten in law school. So it was a great add-on to what I learned. I will say what the clerkship did not prepare me for was the type of client interaction and client communication that I have now become very familiar with. Judicial chambers are a really close, tight-knit environment where you just work really closely with a small group of people. But when you're working with clients, every client brings a different experience or background to their case, or they've lived a range of experiences. So you really have to be able to communicate in different ways about a variety of different topics with your clients. So that has been a shift for me as I move from clerking to the IJC Fellowship. But I try to do a nice balance of, okay, what do I know the judge is looking for? What is legally relevant to my client's case, but also what's important for my client in telling their story, and, being able to include that, even though it might not be the focus of their legal relief. So that's been also a learning curve as I've shifted into the direct services world.
Lauren, that's very helpful. For those who are looking to go into fellowships right out of law school or after a fellowship, any advice you give them knowing what you know today?
Yes, my biggest advice would be do it, go for it. apply for a clerkship, see what works out. Again, it's just been such a valuable experience to developing my litigation skills. And those skills are so needed in the immigration bar, especially to providing the quality lawyering that IJC is developing in the immigration bar. So those are things that you can really get out of clerking, and those are skills you'll develop there. So don't be afraid, go ahead and do it. But specifically, I would also say if you have a chance to get as much experience as you can with legal writing prior to clerking, it just is even easier to jump into those thorny legal issues, those procedural issues that you also get out of clerking. So as much writing as possible in law school and during a fellowship is definitely something that will be extremely helpful to anyone who's interested in clerking. Every day you're doing writing, editing, feedback. So those are all things that will just go beautifully with clerking. But the other piece of advice I have for clerking, or those who are interested in clerking, is to keep an open mind about the types of judges or clerkships that you might be looking at. I think it's easy to think, okay, I'm interested in immigration, so I need to go into a court that either takes immigration appeals or is, handling immigration issues. But think big when you're looking at a clerkship, because there's a lot of opportunities, bankruptcy judges or administrative law judges, where you'll still get a lot of experience with administrative law, preserving the record, learning about exhaustion of administrative remedies. That's going to be extremely valuable to any immigration practitioner. So having that, get creative and have an open mind when you're looking into judges to clerk for. And I mean, even just the bigger principles that you'll learn of due process and motion practice are going to be invaluable to anyone who's going into the immigration practice. So, I just can't speak highly enough about my clerking experience and what it's added to my ability as a litigator. And, even if it's in a totally different area, which was my case, trade law, I was like, trade law, immigration, those don't seem to go hand in hand, but you learn a lot of basic skills and learn how to dive into a very different area of law that's going to come in handy to learning about different country conditions or dealing with a client's, different immigration issue that you have to really dive into an area of law you're maybe not comfortable with. So that flexibility and an ability to dive into different areas of the laws is just invaluable to any lawyer, but especially in this ever-changing immigration landscape, that flexibility is so important.
Lauren, thank you so much for sharing that. And you talk about jumping into things. And I think our next panelist, Miriam, your career trajectory is somewhat unique amongst our alums. What made you decide to start your own private practice after the fellowship? And what were some of the challenges you faced?
Yes, and first I'll say I'm also very grateful for the invitation to be on this panel with all of these wonderful panelists, and a brief reunion with Karla and Jessica was nice as well. So what brought me into private practice? I would say, having been an IJC Fellow working in a nonprofit and also a student attorney at my law school's immigration clinic, I often saw that the private bar didn't have the best reputation amongst when it comes to working with immigrants or other vulnerable populations. And I really wanted to change the way other lawyers, but most importantly, potential clients felt about private attorneys. And the biggest concerns or the biggest complaints that I saw was, no communication with their attorney, right? They couldn't, either they called their attorney, they never returned the call, or it's hard to reach them, or that, they paid a lot of money and there were no results, or they just weren't sure where they were with their case. And so, of course, not to say that my practice is perfect and there are no mistakes made. Of course we do. But I think because we put our clients above our profits, our clients feel valued, and they don't mind paying for services because of that. And so, our values of integrity, over communication, customer service, those are the things that I think sort of set my practice apart from the practices that I saw very early on in my career. And I also started my practice just to do some additional work that I probably wouldn't do in a nonprofit setting, like business and employment immigration. And so through that work, I've been able to help, bank executives transfer from one bank in another country to the US or obtain their green card in the US. And that's been really exciting work because it's very different than what I'm used to and what I've been doing. And overall, I love practicing law, but I really love the business of running a practice. I enjoy the planning and the marketing. I enjoy social media, using social media as a marketing tool, building relationships and training a team, and just being creative in a different way as an entrepreneur. And so I think the challenges that I've come across in the last few years that I've been in practice, one of the main challenges is just, I guess sometimes it can be a little lonely, right? You go from working with a team, I had all of the fellows at IJC plus the team at my nonprofit, and then I went out on my own. And so I think that has been a challenge, but as the years have gone by, I've created relationships with other attorneys, other private practice owners. I've joined groups. I've had the opportunity to be able to bounce ideas off of and sort of have a supervision, because that was also a challenge at the very beginning, because I didn't have a supervisor anymore. I didn't have someone that I can call and say, look, this is the case that's come in, what can I do? Being connected with other lawyers over time, I was able to build those relationships and be able to have someone that I can bounce those things off of. That's been the biggest challenge, I would say, for me, aside from figuring out the business of running a practice. You don't figure that out for a long time. I think I still haven't figured that out, but it's definitely something that I'm still learning and excited to learn about.
Miriam, we applaud you for your resiliency in doing this work. For anyone coming out of law school who is thinking about, I can go into my own and build my own practice, or someone coming out of the fellowship, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, similar to Lauren, definitely do it, right? It's scary. It feels scary, but you can absolutely do it. I started my practice with no business experience, no startup funding, I had, it was something that was an idea, and I just started working at it. I'm, I guess, I don't know how many years later, 4 or 5 years later, I don't know, I'm still here. So it's definitely possible. Other things that, in thinking about this question, I sort of wanted to think about some of the things I wish I knew early on. And one of the things I wish I knew, and that I talked about briefly, is creating relationships, connecting with mentors, other people in private practice early on. This is going to not only help you when you have questions, but also keep you sane, right? There are other people who are going through what you're going through, and you want to know that you're not alone. When you're in business, you have good months and you have bad months. You want to make sure that the bad months are normal, and that you don't give up just because it's been a bad month. Invest in yourself, invest in resources. I know AILA Link, all these things can be expensive, but if you can, there might be scholarship programs to attend AILA conferences. There might be some ways for you to join AILA at a scholarship, with a scholarship. So definitely look into that. But these resources are so important, because having a Kurzban or having a book that you can take a look at when you have a new case coming in and you're not sure how to handle it is invaluable. And you can absolutely do good work, change lives while simultaneously making money. And I think that's something in the first 3 years of practice I didn't think was possible, right? I thought, I can't possibly do a good job and expect people to pay me. And I felt like it wasn't fair. But if you're going in private practice, part of what you're doing is you're starting a business, right? And it needs to be lucrative. And so as long as you're fair and you create your prices in a fair way, there's nothing wrong with charging for the work that you do. And so I think those are the main pieces of advice that I would give someone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now we'll move to the last topic, which is basically the federal government has been trying to recruit more and more lawyers onto the immigration bench. And Judge Burr, you had an opportunity to move from a supervisor at the Legal Aid Society back in the day to become an immigration judge. Can you tell us a bit about why you made that decision?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. But first, I have to say, just as a board member and listening to these alums, I am so impressed by what you've done, what you've learned. I just really, it warms my heart. And I wish that the other board members could hear you speak and understand really what we're all working for, because it is I just feel very proud of you, even though I've just met you. So before, anyway, getting back to why I decided to become an immigration judge, it was a relatively slow process, I have to say. I was a public defender for 14 years with the Legal Aid Society. And after 14 years, I thought I needed to try something else. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to try, but I was at an ALA holiday party and ended up speaking to one of the immigration judges at the party, who turned to me and said, we're hiring and you should apply. And I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe. And I thought about it and I did apply. It was a big step for me to go from being an advocate for 14 years to being a judge. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt comfortable about it. And I felt that I could do a lot of good from the inside. And the immigration bench at that point was changing and seeking people other than trial attorneys from DHS to be judges. So it was not the career choice that I thought I was going to do. I actually thought maybe I'd go into private practice, but it's the one I made and I never looked back. I had a great time.
What would you say to to young practitioners who believe that it is difficult for them to order someone removed, or someone who says getting on the bench is selling out? Based on what you've just shared with us, what would you do to encourage anyone who wants to go on the bench to do so?
Well, I would definitely encourage you to do it. I mean, there is, it's not selling out. It's like one of our, the young lady who started her own law firm, and people often in certain situations think that, you can't charge, for your services. And people do. I had some of that blowback from my fellow attorneys at the Legal Aid Society, when I got the job and I was leaving. I'm not a sellout. I mean, a sellout is someone who betrays their principles. I never betrayed my principles. I kept my principles and I simply used them in a different forum. I really do feel that I was able to do much more as an immigration judge than I was as a practitioner in terms of helping people and doing good. It's a position that takes getting used to, but once you get used to it, the amount of positive things that you can do is exponentially greater than what I could do with my caseload at legal aid. So I think it was an intense learning experience. And I was a judge for 20 years and I was learning for 20 years. You know, there was nothing that was predictable about being a judge. And it was, I just feel that I'm very lucky. I very much enjoyed being a public defender. I very much enjoyed being a judge, and I really loved both jobs. And I would really, I understand a little bit that feeling that, you know, you couldn't order somebody deported. I mean, I remember when I was a new judge, I had to order somebody deported. And, you know, I went home and told my husband about it and I started crying. And, you know, I had no choice. That was the law. And the facts and the law pointed in one direction. And if you take an oath to follow the Constitution and the laws of the United States, that's what you do. On the plus side, there were many more happy occasions when I was able to give people relief. They could become lawful permanent residents, eventually citizens. Families could stay together. You know, their dreams could come true. And that far outweighed the times when I had to order somebody deported.
Thank you. Chris, do we have any questions for the panel?
We sure do, and we're going to try to get to all of them. I see that one question was answered in the chat for Lauren, but I wanted to give Lauren a chance to elaborate. The question is, what was the clerkship interview process like?
So as I put in the chat, the interview process is pretty similar to a fellowship interview process. You submit your documents, and getting the interview is a good sign. It means things are going well. So at that point, you're just being able to speak to your experiences and what you will bring to the position and what you can do with a clerkship. I think specifically to clerking, though, is that fit, that personal fit with your judge and the judge's chambers, because you do work so closely with a judge and you are trusted with so much information and decision making with the judge. So the fit is a huge part of the interviewing process. Just do you and that judge kind of meld? Do you fit in? So that's a big part. And the other thing I didn't put in the chat but should have is that read the judge's decisions. That is crucial to interviewing for clerking, for a clerkship. You have to read at least a handful of the judge's decisions before you go into that interview, so you can talk to them about something that they've done and know what the job entails. So that's all I would say about that in addition to what I wrote.
Thanks so much, Lauren. While we have you, another question just came in for you, similar to the one Jojo asked Judge Burr about, quote unquote, selling out. The question is, when you were clerking, did you ever have to help write some kind of ruling that you thought was unjust? How did you deal with that? Do you think that working in the specialized court that you worked in helped you deal with the situation?
Yes, I think the Court of International Trade doesn't get as many quote unquote controversial decisions, although there's a lot of very important decisions that come out of that court. I didn't have to confront any that I felt were fundamentally unjust, fortunately. But I will say there were certainly times when I didn't agree with the outcome or felt like maybe the decision was going in a way where I didn't agree with. And I was really fortunate that the judge I clerked for was extremely thoughtful and listened to my opinion when I had one that was different from his or other people in chambers or maybe other judges we were sitting with by designation. And And I felt heard, and I felt like I did have the ability to influence how a decision would come out as a clerk. So it doesn't feel like you're just being told what to do. You're there to also give your opinion and your legal analysis as a clerk. So you have the ability to shape those decisions with, as long as it's backed up by the law and the research and a well-presented argument. You know, a good judge will listen to that. So I would suggest clerking for a good, open-minded judge, but hopefully that's most of them.
Thank you, Lauren. We have another question from the attendees. This one is for Miriam. Miriam, can you talk about how you developed your private practice's pricing structure?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So some attorneys charge hourly, right? So they require a retainer of a certain amount and they bill from that amount. And others work on a flat fee type of structure. I've chosen to work on a flat fee structure because I just felt like hourly billing was just unpredictable for the client, also for myself. And so what I did was I thought about what I wanted my hourly rate to be, and then I thought about the work that goes into a certain type of case, right? And you want to think about the value that you're providing to the client as well, right? Some people might fold in mailing item, mailing or additional expenses. Other people charge separately. I decide to make everything a part of a flat fee. And so I think the best thing to do in determining what your fee should be or how you should structure your fees is determining, one, what works best for you, but two, what your hourly rate is and how much time is going to go into the type of case that you're taking on. And try it out, right? No one says that your fee has to stay the same. You can try one fee out and see how it works. Maybe you're undercharging because it took more work than you thought, or the other way around. Maybe it takes a lot less than you thought and you didn't have to charge as much. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Miriam. We have about 5 minutes left, and I do want to try to get through everyone's questions. This next one is an open one, but I think all panelists will have a similar answer. Can any of the speakers touch on the importance of knowing a second language?
Very important.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that I just said very important.
Yeah, I agree. It's very important. I think there are two things, right? Like, it's very important having a second language a second language that your client speak will bring you closer and like allow you to understand certain aspects, and both like because of the language and culturally better. But you will not ever know all the languages. So I think it's important to also be very comfortable and like dedicate the time in like understanding and learning how to work with interpreters, because you will need it no matter, like there's no one, I mean, I guess it's some people who know all the languages, but it's very rare. So I think that's important. And also having, like right now we had changed our requirement for hiring. We used to require Spanish language because that was like the largest like the main language for most of our clients, but that also left out a lot of clients that we represented, right? Like we had clients who spoke Creole, we had clients who spoke Fulani, like we had a lot of other languages, and also we were excluding people who were closer to the communities we serve that have other cultural competency, even if they didn't have the language. So now we have expanded our requirement for advocates. And we ask that people are like, we have a preference for Spanish speakers or people who are from the same communities that we represent or who might be directly impacted by the systems.
Thank you, Karla. We're getting
Chris,
yes,
Chris,
Jojo.
can I just interject here that
Please.
We recognize that a lot of times we ask for people to have a second language, but we as a fellowship recognize that there are so many people who don't speak a second language, and would like to make the effort to learn it. And so going forward in our fellowship program, we are more than happy to find or to bring on people who don't speak a language, but interested in learning the language through either immersion courses or language classes during the fellowship period, whilst we provide them with interpreter services. But it's a way to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to do this job, as long as they have the passion to do it and want to learn the skills to be able to impact the lives of our clients.
Thank you, Jojo. I realize we're running up on time, so I will consolidate some of these questions. We're getting a lot of questions about mental health and dealing with vicarious trauma. There is one for Judge Burr, but I think this can be an open question for anyone on the panel. With the growing backlog of immigration cases, over 2 million now, how did you deal with a workload that may feel like an endless treadmill run?
Well, when I was a judge, we had a backlog, but it wasn't 2 million. But it was, I would say the caseload was relentless. And the way I dealt with it was I just kept telling myself it's one case at a time. This, whatever case I'm hearing, it's extremely important to the people in front of me. I'm going to listen to the whole case and I'm going to decide it on my timetable. And that's, I think, the only way that you can keep not only your sanity, but your good spirits on the job, because the caseload is overwhelming, but you just have to step back and say one respondent at a time. You know, it's too important to get caught up in the numbers and in the fact that there is such a backlog.
Thank you, Judge Burr. I realize we are at time, although I do want to be conscious of the fact that we started a little bit late. If panelists are able to stay for another 5 minutes, are we okay answering the last 3 questions in the chat? I'm seeing some nods. Okay, thank you, Jojo. If you're okay with that, I think if others need to hop off, totally understood. Yes. This will be recorded either way.
Okay.
So let's see, let's go to another question from Miriam. How did you go about navigating the lack of funding when you started your private practice?
Start small, start very low overhead. Don't do too much at the very beginning. You know, I was in my basement at a desk and I started to take on clients that way. But eventually clients want to see that you have an office space, or at least pre-2020. Now they're a little bit more open to a virtual, having your attorney on a screen, but you don't want to overdo it at the beginning. And that's what I did. I kept my overhead very low. I had a laptop and my desk and practice management software so that my clients' information can stay safe and in one place. And you grow, you can grow, as you grow, you can add things on that you need.
Thank you, Miriam. And this last question, I believe is for Jessica, but anyone can take it. Does being a clinical teaching fellow require an applicant to have completed a JD and the bar exam? Would an LLM graduate be eligible for a position like that? Or more generally, are there roles in immigration law available for someone who is not barred in the US, but is barred in another jurisdiction and has experience in asylum law?
So I'll caveat this by saying I'm not sure what the requirements are for LLMs, and I assume, Jojo, you might know more about that. I think for purposes of clinical teaching fellowships, the main thing is, especially in immigration law, the main question is whether you can supervise individuals who are showing up in immigration court. And if the answer is yes, then I think it's totally fine to have different permutations or iterations of legal practical knowledge, as long as you have the experience and ability to supervise cases before the immigration court. And then in terms of the federal courts, we do take on federal court cases. And so the question is whether you can appear either individually or co-counsel with somebody and appear pro hoc vice as counsel before the federal district courts or before the courts of appeals. But in terms of like precisely an LLM, I'm not exactly sure. So I'm not sure if other folks know the direct answer to that question.
Jessica, I don't either. I think it all boils down to lawful status as well, of whether someone can take on permanent employment. And so to depend on whether the law school or the university wants to apply for an H-1B for the person, I think that's one of the keys to getting into clinical programs.
Thanks, Jojo.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Jojo. So those were all the questions from the attendees. Thanks everyone who asked questions on behalf of IJC. Thank you so much to our panelists who took time to participate in this wonderful conversation. I don't know if Jojo, you have any last words before we sign off?
No, the only thing I will say is that there was a question about well-being, and I want folks to know that at IJC, well-being is well-doing. And we make sure that apart from recruiting and placement, we support our fellows, making sure that they are taking care of themselves. We provide necessary supports. And for anyone in the audience who is thinking about a fellowship, think about IJC. This year, we are bringing in our largest class of about 88 new lawyers. Next year, that number may go up. So if you're interested in working with us, if you're interested in lifting up immigrants out of poverty, and making sure that their due process rights are protected, we are the ones to get your careers started in immigration, and we'll support you all the way. So thank you so much for making the time this afternoon. I thank our panelists. Our fellows inspire us every day to continue to do this work and to continue to help immigrants who really need representation, which they cannot afford, to be able to access the courts and also to be able to apply for relief. So thank you so much, and look forward to seeing all of you in our other webinars during the year. Thank you so much.